Rain pounded against the windshield so hard that David Miller could barely see the road ahead. His wife Rachel sat beside him, checking her phone for the weather alert that had just buzzed through. They had enjoyed a nice dinner at their favorite restaurant, but now the storm had turned the drive home into something almost dangerous. David slowed the car to a crawl as water rushed across the street like a small river. The wipers worked frantically but could not keep up with the downpour. Thunder crashed overhead, making Rachel jump slightly in her seat. Then something moved in the headlights. David slammed on the brakes. A small shape darted across the flooded road, stumbling and sliding on the wet pavement. It disappeared into the darkness of an alley between two buildings. What was that? Rachel asked, leaning forward to peer through the rain-streaked window. Probably a cat, David said, but his voice sounded uncertain. Rachel was already unbuckling her seatbelt. As a veterinary nurse, she had spent years caring for injured and abandoned animals. The instinct to help was too strong to ignore. "Rachel, it's pouring out there," David protested, but he was already pulling the car to the side of the road. He knew his wife well enough to know she would not leave any creature suffering in this storm. They grabbed the emergency flashlight from the glove compartment and stepped out into the rain. Within seconds, they were both soaked to the skin. The water was cold and the wind whipped it into their faces as they hurried toward the alley. The flashlight beam cut through the darkness, illuminating overflowing dumpsters and scattered trash. Water poured from a broken drain pipe, creating a waterfall against the brick wall. Then Rachel spotted it. Huddled behind a stack of empty crates was the creature. At first glance, it looked like it might be a cat or perhaps a small dog. But as the light fell across it, both David and Rachel froze in shock. Scales covered its tiny body, shimmering with colors that shifted between deep purple and electric blue even in the dim light. Small wings, delicate and transparent like a bat's but covered in that same scaled skin, were pressed tight against its trembling sides. The creature was no bigger than a kitten, shaking violently from cold and fear. Its head lifted and two enormous eyes stared at them. The eyes were not like any animal Rachel had ever treated. They glowed faintly with an inner light, showing intelligence that seemed far beyond what such a small creature should possess. Fear filled those eyes, but also something else. Hope, perhaps, or desperate need. "David," Rachel whispered, her voice barely audible over the rain. "What is that?" David could not answer. His mind struggled to accept what he was seeing. Dragons did not exist. They were myths, stories, fantasies. Yet here, in this dirty alley behind a Chinese restaurant, a tiny dragon shivered in the rain. The creature made a small sound, something between a whimper and a chirp. It tried to move but stumbled, too weak to run away. Rachel's professional instincts took over. Whatever this creature was, it was suffering and needed help. She moved slowly, speaking in the soft, calm voice she used with frightened animals at the clinic. "It's okay, little one. We're not going to hurt you." The creature watched her approach but did not try to flee. Perhaps it was too weak. Perhaps it understood somehow that these humans meant no harm. When Rachel reached out her hand, the creature sniffed at her fingers with a tiny snout, then pressed its head against her palm. The scales felt warm despite the cold rain, smooth but with a texture unlike anything Rachel had touched before. The creature was so light when she picked it up, as if its bones were hollow like a bird's. It curled immediately against her chest, seeking warmth and shelter. David took off his jacket and wrapped it around both Rachel and the creature as they rushed back to the car. Inside, with the heater running and the doors closed against the storm, they got their first good look at what they had found. The creature was definitely a dragon, or at least something very much like the dragons from old stories and movies. But it was a baby, probably only days old. Its scales were still soft in places and its movements were clumsy and uncoordinated. The wings were too small for flight, barely developed. When it opened its mouth to make another small sound, they could see tiny pointed teeth and a forked tongue. "We need to call someone," David said, still staring in disbelief. "Animal control? The police? A zoo?" Rachel shook her head. "And tell them what? That we found a baby dragon? They'll think we're crazy. And if they do believe us..." She trailed off, but they both knew what she meant. This creature would end up in a laboratory, studied and tested and probably never free again. The dragon hatchling looked up at Rachel with those impossibly intelligent eyes. It made a soft cooing sound and nuzzled against her arm. Something in that moment made the decision for both of them. "We're taking it home," Rachel said firmly. David nodded slowly. "Just for tonight, until we figure out what to do." But as he drove through the rain toward their house with Rachel cradling the tiny dragon in her arms, David suspected that this was not just for one night. This creature had come into their lives for a reason, impossible as it seemed. Their quiet, ordinary existence had just changed in ways they could not yet imagine. The dragon hatchling fell asleep before they reached home, exhausted and finally warm. Its tiny chest rose and fell with steady breaths. In sleep, it looked peaceful and innocent, just a baby that needed care and protection. Neither David nor Rachel spoke for the rest of the drive. Both were lost in their own thoughts, trying to process what had happened. They had left for dinner as a normal couple living normal lives. They were returning home as the guardians of something magical and impossible. Tomorrow would bring questions and decisions and probably more confusion. But tonight they had saved a life. That was enough. 3 months had passed since that stormy night, and David still sometimes wondered if he was living in a dream. He sat at his desk working from home, trying to focus on the code displayed across his computer monitors. Behind him, curled up on a specially made cushion near the window, was Pip. They had named the dragon hatchling Pip after arguing for 2 days about what to call him. Rachel had suggested grand names like Thunder or Blaze, but those felt too dramatic for the small creature who loved to play with yarn balls and chase laser pointers. Pip was simple and somehow perfect. Pip had grown since they found him, but not as much as they expected. He was now about the size of a large cat, maybe 15 pounds. His scales had become more vibrant, shifting colors depending on his mood and the light. Purple when calm, electric blue when excited, and occasionally flashing green when he was hungry or annoyed. The truly remarkable thing was his intelligence. Within the first week, Pip understood basic commands like come and stay. By the second week, he responded to complex sentences. Now, 3 months later, David was convinced that Pip understood everything they said. Sometimes the dragon would tilt his head while they talked, as if thinking deeply about their words. Pip could not speak, of course. But he communicated in other ways. Different chirps and trills seemed to mean different things. He would point with his nose at objects he wanted. Once, when Rachel had a headache, Pip had brought her the medicine bottle from the bathroom cabinet without being asked. Strange things had started happening around the house. Electronics behaved oddly when Pip was nearby and emotional. Last week, David's laptop had rebooted itself 3 times during a work presentation, all while Pip sat nearby feeling anxious about being left alone. The television sometimes changed channels on its own when Pip stared at it too long. Rachel called from the kitchen. "David, can you come look at this?" David found her standing by the refrigerator with her tablet in hand. Pip perched on the counter nearby, looking proud of himself. "I left my tablet here while I made lunch," Rachel explained. "When I came back, this was on the screen." The tablet displayed something David had never seen before. It looked like a star chart, but not one from any astronomy app he recognized. Symbols and lines connected various points of light. Some of the symbols resembled constellations he knew, but others were completely unfamiliar. "Did you download a new app?" David asked. Rachel shook her head. "I didn't do anything." Pip was alone with it. They both looked at the dragon. Pip chirped and touched the screen with one small claw. The image zoomed in on a particular cluster of stars. More symbols appeared, flowing across the screen like living light. "That's not possible," David muttered, but he was staring to realize that impossible had lost all meaning since they found Pip. Dragons were impossible. Yet here one sat on their kitchen counter, apparently accessing star maps through his wife's tablet. Over the next few days, the strange occurrences increased. David's computer would sometimes display files he had never created, filled with more of those mysterious symbols. Pip spent hours staring at the night sky through the bedroom window, making soft sounds that seemed almost like singing. Then one night, everything changed. David was downloading a software update when his computer screen suddenly went black. Before he could react, it lit up again with a 3-dimensional holographic display that projected above the keyboard. Symbols swirled in the air, bright and pulsing with light. Pip had been sleeping on his cushion, but now the dragon was wide awake and staring at the hologram. He jumped onto the desk and reached toward the floating symbols with one claw. The moment Pip touched the hologram, it changed. A new image appeared showing what looked like coordinates. Numbers and symbols David could not read scrolled past quickly. Then a single word appeared in English. "Signal received." "Rachel." David called out, his voice tight with alarm. "You need to see this." Rachel came running from the other room. They both watched as the hologram pulsed faster and brighter. Pip chirped excitedly, touching different symbols with his claws as if he knew exactly what he was doing. "What did you do, Pip?" Rachel whispered. The answer came 30 minutes later. They were both sitting on the couch trying to make sense of what had happened when light flooded through the windows, not the white light of car headlights or the orange glow of street lamps. This light was blue-white and impossibly bright, turning their backyard into something that looked like midday. David rushed to the window and pulled back the curtain. His mind struggled to process what he saw. A ship hovered above their backyard. It was sleek and silver, maybe 30 feet long with no visible engines or wings. Smooth curves made up its hull, and soft light emanated from panels along its sides. The ship made no sound at all as it slowly descended, landing gently on their lawn without crushing a single blade of grass. "We need to call the police," David said, but his voice sounded distant and strange even to himself. "And tell them what?" Rachel replied, unconsciously repeating what she had said 3 months ago in the rain. "That aliens landed in our backyard?" Pip was pressing against the window, wings spread wide in excitement. He chirped loudly, a sound of recognition and joy. A door opened in the side of the ship and 2 figures stepped out. They walked toward the house with confident strides. When they got close enough for David and Rachel to see them clearly through the porch light, shock gave way to even greater confusion. The visitors were human, or at least they looked human. Both wore dark uniforms that seemed to be made from material that shifted and flowed like liquid metal. Strange devices were attached to their belts. The woman leading had short dark hair and warm brown skin. The man following her was tall with kind eyes and a calm expression. David opened the door before they could knock. What else could he do? "David Miller and Rachel Miller?" the woman asked. Her voice was professional but not unfriendly. "Yes," David managed to say. "Who are you?" "I'm Captain Nora Hayes and this is Lieutenant Sam Okafor. We're from the United Earth Coalition." She paused, seeming to choose her words carefully. "We've come about the dragon." Rachel stepped forward, instinctively protective. "How do you know about Pip?" "The signal he sent," Lieutenant Okafor explained gently. "When he activated the genetic beacon in your computer system, it alerted our monitoring stations. We came as quickly as we could." "Genetic beacon?" David repeated. "We don't understand any of this. Who are you, really? Where did that ship come from?" Captain Hayes smiled slightly. "May we come inside? This conversation might take a while, and what we have to tell you will be difficult to believe." David and Rachel exchanged glances. Their lives had already become unbelievable. What was one more impossible thing? They let the visitors inside. Pip immediately flew to Captain Hayes, circling around her head with excited chirps. She laughed and held out her hand, letting the dragon land on her arm. "Hello there, little one," she said softly. "You've grown well despite being so far from home." "What do you mean, far from home?" Rachel asked. "Where is Pip from?" Captain Hayes looked at them both with an expression of sympathy and wonder. "Pip is not from Earth," she said quietly. "And neither are we exactly. We're human, yes, but we're from 150 years in your future. Pip is a member of the Draconis stellaris species, creatures that were born in the hearts of stars. And somehow he ended up here in your time, alone and lost." The room fell silent except for Pip's gentle purring as he nuzzled against the captain's uniform. David sat down heavily on the couch, his mind reeling. Time travelers, star dragons, the future. Their quiet life had not just changed. It had been turned completely upside down. Rachel had not slept all night. She sat in the living room watching the sunrise through the window, her hands wrapped around a cup of coffee that had gone cold hours ago. Pip lay curled in her lap, his small body rising and falling with each breath. His scales looked duller than usual in the morning light, and that worried her more than anything else. Captain Hayes and Lieutenant Okafor had talked for 3 hours last night, explaining things that sounded like science fiction. They spoke of wormholes and time displacement, of ancient species and galactic communities. David had asked 100 questions, his analytical mind trying to make sense of the impossible, but Rachel had mostly stayed quiet, holding Pip close and feeling a growing dread in her chest. Now David came down the stairs looking as tired as she felt. He sat beside her on the couch without speaking. They had 24 hours to make their decision, 24 hours to choose between keeping Pip and losing him forever. "He's dying," Rachel said quietly. Even if they hadn't told us, I would know. I can see it, David nodded. Over the past month, they had both noticed small changes. Pip slept more than he used to. His appetite had decreased. Sometimes he would just sit by the window staring at the sky with an expression that looked almost like longing or pain. Captain Hayes had explained it in medical terms that Rachel understood too well. Pip was a star dragon, a creature whose species evolved in the radiation-rich environment near young stars. He needed specific types of cosmic radiation to grow and thrive, the same way plants needed sunlight. Here on Earth, protected by the atmosphere and magnetic field that kept humans safe, Pip was slowly starving. She said he has maybe a year, David said. If he stays here, he'll never grow larger than this. Never develop his full abilities. Never become what he's meant to be. And then he'll die, Rachel finished. Her voice cracked slightly. Young, small, never knowing what he could have been. Pip stirred in her lap, making a small questioning sound. Rachel stroked his head gently, running her fingers along the ridge of scales behind his ears. The dragon pressed into her touch, purring softly. They had only known Pip for 3 months, but it felt like so much longer. He had become part of their family, part of their daily routine. Rachel could not imagine coming home from work and not having Pip greet her at the door. David could not imagine working at his desk without the dragon curled up nearby, occasionally chirping for attention. But love meant wanting what was best for those you cared about even when it hurt. A knock came at the door. Captain Hayes stood on the porch looking apologetic for the early visit. Lieutenant Okafor waited by their ship, which still sat in the backyard as if it belonged there. "I'm sorry to intrude," Hayes said, "but I wanted to check on Pip. Sometimes the hatchlings get sick quickly once we've identified them." Rachel invited her inside. Hayes knelt beside the couch and examined Pip with the practiced eye of someone who had done this before. She pulled a small device from her belt and waved it over the dragon's body. The device beeped softly, displaying information on a tiny screen. "His cellular structure is degrading faster than I hoped," Hayes said, her voice gentle but honest. "The Earth environment is literally toxic to him at this stage of development. Not immediately fatal, but like a slow poison." "How long does he really have?" David asked. Hayes met his eyes. 6 months, maybe 8 if you keep him comfortable." "I'm sorry." Rachel felt tears burning in her eyes but refused to let them fall. She needed to be strong, to think clearly. "Tell us about where you would take him." Hayes sat down on the floor, apparently understanding that this conversation needed to happen. "There's a station near the Orion Nebula, built specifically to study and protect rare species. It orbits a young star that produces the exact radiation signature that Pip needs. We have specialists there, scientists who have spent their lives learning about creatures like him." "What would his life be like?" Rachel asked. "He would grow," Hayes said simply. "In that environment, with proper care, Pip could reach his full size within 10 years. Star dragons can grow to be nearly 30 feet long with wingspans twice that. He would develop abilities we can only guess at, based on ancient records. Flight through vacuum, telepathic communication, possibly even the power to manipulate certain forms of energy." "Would he be happy?" David asked. Hayes smiled sadly. "I can't promise happiness, but I can promise he would be healthy and safe. He would have purpose, and he would live for thousands of years instead of dying young and unfulfilled." Pip crawled from Rachel's lap to Hayes's, looking up at the captain with those intelligent eyes. He chirped softly, and Hayes responded by gently scratching under his chin. "There is another option," Hayes said carefully. "It's against several regulations, and my superiors would not be happy if they knew I offered it. But I think you deserve to hear all the choices." Rachel and David both leaned forward. "You could come with him," Hayes said. "The United Earth Coalition has civilian settlement programs. We're always looking for people willing to start new lives on stations and colonies throughout the galaxy. It's dangerous. It's permanent. You would never see Earth again. Never talk to your families or friends. Everything you know would be left behind." The room went silent. Rachel heard her own heartbeat pounding in her ears. "But Pip could have his parents," Hayes continued, "and you would have adventures most people can only dream about. I won't lie to you. Space is beautiful and terrible. You might love it or you might regret your choice every day. But at least you would be together." David stood up and walked to the window. Rachel could see the tension in his shoulders. the way his hands clenched and unclenched as he thought. "Can we have our 24 hours?" Rachel asked. "Like you promised?" "Of course." Hayes stood and headed for the door. "I'll be on the ship. If Pip's condition worsens at all, please let me know immediately." After she left, David and Rachel sat in silence. Pip climbed onto the couch between them, looking from one to the other as if he could sense the weight of the decision they faced. Give up Pip and stay in their comfortable, familiar life, or give up everything they had ever known and leap into the unknown with a baby dragon who needed them. Rachel thought about her job at the veterinary clinic, her friends, her sister who called every Sunday, the house they had worked so hard to buy. Her entire life was here. But then she looked at Pip, who had pressed his small body against her side, trusting and innocent and slowly dying. "I keep thinking about that night we found him," Rachel said softly. "Cold and alone in the rain. We could have driven past, we could have left him there, but we didn't." "We saved him," David agreed. "Now we have to choose if we save him again," Rachel continued. "Really save him. Give him the life he deserves, even if it costs us everything." David came back to the couch and sat down. He took Rachel's hand in his. They had been married for 7 years, together for 10. They knew each other's thoughts almost before they were spoken. "I've been thinking," David said slowly, "about my job, my friends, this house, and I realized something. None of it makes me feel the way Pip does. None of it makes me feel truly alive." Rachel squeezed his hand. "I feel the same way." They looked at each other, and in that moment they both knew. The decision had already been made, probably the instant Captain Hayes mentioned they could go with Pip. Everything else was just fear and doubt trying to hold them back. "Let's do something crazy," Rachel whispered. David smiled, really smiled, for the first time since the visitors arrived. "Let's go to the stars." Pip chirped loudly, his scales flashing bright blue with excitement. Somehow, Rachel was certain the little dragon understood exactly what they had decided. Rachel pressed her face against the viewport window and watched Earth shrink behind them. The planet that had been her entire world for 32 years now looked like a blue marble floating in an ocean of black. She could see the swirl of white clouds, the brown and green of continents, the vast blue of the oceans. It was beautiful and terrifying, and she was leaving it forever. Beside her, David held Pip in his arms. The little dragon had his nose pressed to the window too, making excited chirping sounds. His scales flickered with colors Rachel had never seen before, responding to the new environment in ways they did not fully understand. 2 days had passed since they made their decision. 2 days of frantic preparations, of selling what they could and abandoning the rest, of tearful phone calls with family where they lied about a sudden overseas job opportunity. Rachel's sister had cried and begged her to reconsider. David's parents had been confused and hurt, but they could not tell anyone the truth. Who would believe it? Now they stood in the main cabin of the Pathfinder, a ship that should not exist according to everything they knew about science. Yet here, it was, carrying them away from home at speeds that made light seem slow. Lieutenant Okafor appeared behind them, moving with the easy grace of someone who had spent years in space. "We'll be passing Mars in about 10 minutes if you want to see it," he said with a friendly smile. "Mars," David repeated, still sounding dazed. "The actual planet Mars." "The very same," Okafor laughed. "I remember my first time leaving Earth. Threw up 3 times from the motion sickness. But the medbay has good medicine now. You both seem to be handling it well." Rachel did feel slightly queasy, but whether from the motion or from the enormity of what they had done, she could not say. She focused on the view, on the wonder of seeing things no human from her time had ever witnessed. Mars appeared as a red dot that grew larger with impossible speed. Within minutes, they could see its surface features, the massive canyon systems and dead volcanoes. The ship did not slow down or orbit. Mars flashed past and was gone, just another landmark on their journey. "Where exactly are we going?" David asked. "First to a way station near Jupiter for supplies and final preparations," Okafor explained. "Then we make the big jump to faster than light speeds. From there, about 2 weeks to reach Stellar Haven Station in the Orion region. 2 weeks to cross hundreds of light years, Rachel murmured. That's impossible. Okafor grinned. You're standing on a spaceship holding a baby dragon and talking to a man from the future. I think impossible doesn't mean much anymore. He had a point. Captain Hayes called from the bridge. Okafor, I need you up here. We're approaching the way station. The lieutenant excused himself, leaving Rachel and David alone with Pip. The dragon squirmed in David's arms, wanting down. When David set him on the floor, Pip immediately scurried toward a panel on the wall that glowed with soft blue light. Should he be touching that? Rachel asked nervously. Before David could answer, Pip pressed his small claw against the panel. Instantly, the lights in the cabin shifted, becoming warmer and softer. The hum of the ship's engines changed pitch slightly, becoming less noticeable. Captain Hayes' voice came over an intercom. Who just adjusted the environmental controls? Pip did, David called back. Is that bad? There was a pause, then Hayes actually laughed. No, it's fine. He set them to optimal levels for his species. Apparently, he understands the ship's systems better than some of my crew. Star dragons were space travelers long before humans existed. I guess some of that knowledge is instinctive. Over the following hours, they watched Jupiter approach. The gas giant was so huge it did not seem real, more like a painted backdrop than an actual planet. Its red spots swirled with storms larger than Earth itself. Dozens of moons orbited around it, each one a world unto itself. The way station was a ring of metal and light floating near one of Jupiter's larger moons. Ships of various sizes docked along its outer edge. Some looked human-made, sleek, and functional. Others had designs that made no sense to Rachel's eyes, all curves and angles that seemed wrong. Are those alien ships? David asked, his voice filled with childlike wonder. Some of them, Hayes confirmed. She had joined them in the cabin, apparently, having set the ship on some kind of automatic approach. Humanity is part of a larger community now, 18 different species all working together. You'll see more of them at Stellar Haven. They docked at the way station for 6 hours. Hayes and Okafor left to handle official business, leaving Rachel and David to explore the station's civilian areas. Walking through the corridors felt like stepping into a dream. They passed humans wearing clothes from different eras and cultures, all settlers and travelers like themselves. But they also passed beings that were definitely not human. A tall creature with skin like blue crystal nodded politely as it walked past. Something that looked like a floating ball of tentacles drifted by, speaking in musical tones to a human companion who seemed to understand perfectly. In a small garden area, a family of beings with 6 legs and fur-covered bodies tended to plants that glowed with bioluminescent light. Pip rode on David's shoulder through it all, his eyes wide with wonder. Other travelers smiled at the sight of the baby dragon. One elderly human woman stopped them just to tell them how adorable Pip was, as if seeing a dragon was the most normal thing in the universe. In a small cafe, they ate food made from ingredients grown in space. It tasted different from anything on Earth, but not bad, just strange. A friendly woman at the next table struck up a conversation, asking about Pip and sharing stories of her own journey from Earth 30 years ago. You never stop missing home, she said honestly. But you learn to find new homes, new families. Space is vast, but people are people everywhere. You'll be okay. Her words gave Rachel comfort she did not know she needed. When they returned to the Pathfinder, Hayes informed them they would be making the jump to faster-than-light travel within the hour. She explained the process as best she could, though most of it went over their heads. Something about folding space and quantum tunnels and mathematics that made David's head hurt. Just stay seated and strapped in, she advised. Some people feel strange when we make the jump. Others don't notice anything. Either way, it only lasts a few seconds. They settled into comfortable seats in the passenger cabin. Pip curled up between them, purring softly. Through the viewport, they could see the stars, countless billions of them shining in the darkness. Hayes counted down over the intercom. Jump in 10 seconds, 9, 8. Rachel grabbed David's hand. 3, 2, 1, jump. The universe twisted. That was the only way Rachel could describe it. For a brief moment that felt like forever and no time at all, everything bent and stretched and folded in ways that should not be possible. Colors she had no names for flashed past. She felt like she was being pulled in every direction at once while also standing completely still. Then it was over. The stars outside looked different now. Brighter, more numerous, arranged in patterns Rachel did not recognize. They were no longer in their own solar system. They were somewhere else entirely, hundreds of light years from home. Jump complete, Hayes announced. Welcome to deep space, folks. Next stop, Stellar Haven Station. Pip stood up on the seat and chirped loudly. His scales were glowing now, actually glowing with an internal light that pulsed in rhythm with his heartbeat. He spread his tiny wings as far as they would go and made a sound that was almost like singing. What's happening to him? David asked, concerned. Hayes came to check on Pip, her expression pleased rather than worried. He's responding to the stellar radiation from the nearby stars. We're in an area rich with young, bright stars. He can feel the energy he needs. Look. As they watched, Pip's scales seemed to shimmer and solidify, becoming more vibrant than ever before. He jumped onto the viewport and pressed his face against it, staring out at the new stars with obvious joy. He's already getting healthier, Rachel realized, feeling tears of relief in her eyes. This is just the beginning, Hayes said softly. Wait until we reach the station. Wait until he's exposed to proper stellar radiation in a controlled environment. You're going to see him transform into something amazing. Over the next 2 weeks of travel, they watched Pip change day by day. He grew slightly larger. His movements became more coordinated and his intelligence seemed to expand even further. He learned to control the ship's temperature and lighting without even touching the controls, somehow interfacing with the systems through thought alone. But the most remarkable change happened in Rachel's mind one quiet evening. She was sitting alone in the cabin, looking out at the incredible nebula they were passing through. Clouds of glowing gas in purple and pink and gold stretched for light years, forming new stars in their cosmic wombs. Pip was curled in her lap, half asleep. Then she heard a voice, not with her ears but somehow in her thoughts. "Mother," Rachel gasped. She looked down at Pip, whose eyes were open and fixed on her face. "Mother," the voice came again, young and uncertain but clear. "Thank you for saving me. Thank you for choosing me." "Pip?" Rachel whispered aloud. "Can you hear me?" "Yes," his voice echoed in her mind. "I hear you. I always heard you. Now you can hear me too." Rachel called for David, her voice shaking with emotion. When he came running, worried something was wrong, Pip spoke to him too. That night, they sat together in wonder as their adopted son communicated with them for the first time in words, sharing his thoughts and feelings and dreams. The little dragon who they found dying in the rain had become something more, and their journey together had only just begun. David floated through the corridor of Stellar Haven Station, still not quite used to the rotating sections that created artificial gravity in some areas, while leaving others in microgravity. 4 months had passed since they arrived, but every day still felt like waking up in a science fiction story. Through the massive transparent walls of the main hub, he could see the station's full glory. Stellar Haven was a ring 50 miles in diameter, spinning slowly around a brilliant blue star. The star bathed everything in light that somehow felt alive, rich with the radiation that Pip needed to thrive. Smaller modules and laboratories extended from the main ring like spokes on a wheel, each one dedicated to studying different forms of exotic life. But what made David stop and stare even after 4 months was seeing Pip fly past the viewport outside. The dragon was no longer the tiny creature they had found in the rain. Pip had grown to the size of a horse, his wingspan now stretching nearly 20 feet across. His scales had deepened into rich purples and blues that seemed to contain entire galaxies when the light hit them right. He moved through the vacuum of space as easily as a bird through air, powered by abilities that the station's scientists were still trying to understand. Pip saw David through the viewport, and his mental voice filled David's thoughts. "Father, come to Observation Deck 7. You have to see this." David smiled and pushed off from the wall, floating down the corridor toward the nearest elevator. He still worked for the station as part of the computational systems team, helping maintain the complex networks that kept 12,000 beings alive in the hostile environment of space. But he always made time when Pip called. The observation deck was crowded with researchers and civilians alike. David spotted Rachel immediately, standing with Dr. Patricia Wong near the main viewing window. Rachel wore the blue uniform of the xenobiology department now, having found her calling studying the incredibly diverse forms of life the universe had created. She saw David and waved him over, her face bright with excitement. "You have to see this." Outside, Pip was not alone. 3 other creatures swam through space around him, teaching him what looked like a complex dance. They were lumens, beings made of pure energy bound together by magnetic fields. They glowed with soft golden light and moved in patterns that seemed almost musical. "They've been teaching him for 3 hours, Dr. Wong explained, her eyes glued to the tablet she held. "Watch what happens next." Pip suddenly flared with light, his entire body glowing bright enough to make everyone shield their eyes. When the light faded, he had somehow moved 100 yards without appearing to fly the distance. He had teleported or something close to it. The lumens pulsed with colors that their translation devices rendered as applause and joy. "Impossible," one of the junior researchers muttered. "Apparently not," Dr. Wong replied with a grin. Pip just performed a spatial jump. His species must have evolved the ability to move through space-time in ways we're only beginning to understand. Rachel's mind buzzed with wonder and pride. Their little Pip, learning to bend the laws of physics as easily as he once learned to fetch. Through their telepathic link, which had grown stronger as Pip matured, David felt the dragon's pure joy at the accomplishment. Pip's thoughts were more complex now, filled with concepts and ideas that David sometimes struggled to fully grasp. But the core of who Pip was remained the same. He was still their son, still the creature who loved to play and explore and learn. After the demonstration, Pip returned to the station through one of the specialized airlocks designed for non-humanoid species. David and Rachel met him in the xenobiology lab where he spent most of his time between lessons and explorations. The lab was enormous, with different sections maintained at different temperatures and atmospheres to accommodate various research subjects. Pip's area was kept at near vacuum with controlled stellar radiation, but he could create a temporary bubble of breathable atmosphere when he wanted to interact with his parents directly. He settled his large body on the specialized platform built for him, wrapping his tail around himself in a gesture they had learned meant contentment. His mental voice touched both their minds simultaneously. "I have been remembering things," Pip said thoughtfully. "Not my memories, but older ones. Memories that belonged to my ancestors." This was new. Dr. Wong had theorized that Pip might have genetic memory, knowledge encoded in his DNA from thousands of generations. But this was the first time Pip had mentioned it directly. "What kind of memories?" Rachel asked, sitting down on a nearby bench. Pip's eyes took on a distant quality, as if he was looking at something far away in time and space. "I remember flying between stars when the galaxy was young. I remember songs that could reshape matter and dances that opened doorways between dimensions. I remember a time when my kind were many, when we traveled freely and helped younger species find their way among the stars." "What happened to them?" David asked quietly. "Where did the other star dragons go?" "They left," Pip replied simply. "Not because they died, but because they chose to move beyond this reality. They felt their time in this universe was complete. They wanted to explore other dimensions, other forms of existence, so they opened a great door and passed through it, leaving this space to younger beings." Rachel felt a chill run down her spine. "Then why are you here? Why were you left behind?" Pip was quiet for a long moment. When he finally answered, his mental voice carried a weight of uncertainty. "I do not know. Perhaps I was meant to stay. Perhaps I was forgotten. Or perhaps I chose to remain for a reason I do not yet understand. The memories are old and incomplete, like trying to remember a dream." Dr. Wong, who had been listening quietly, spoke up. "Whatever the reason, Pip, you're here now. And you're helping us learn so much about the universe and about your species. That has value." Over the following weeks, Pip's abilities continued to develop at an astonishing rate. He learned to communicate telepathically with multiple beings at once, creating a network of minds that could share thoughts and feelings instantly. He demonstrated the ability to sense cosmic events from light years away, predicting solar flares and stellar phenomena before any instruments detected them. But he also remained playful and curious in ways that reminded Rachel of the kitten-sized hatchling they had found. He loved to race with the station's small transport ships, always winning but always gracious about it. He enjoyed learning languages from the different species on the station, collecting words and phrases like treasures. David and Rachel had made friends among the station's diverse population. There was Grix, An engineer from a species that breathed methane and lived in a pressurized tank but had a wonderful sense of humor. Talara, a crystalline scientist whose body chimed like bells when she laughed, taught Rachel about xenobiology from perspectives no human had ever considered. Captain Hayes and Lieutenant Okafor visited regularly, bringing news from Earth and other human colonies. They had become good friends, often sharing meals and stories in the station's communal dining areas where dozens of species gathered to eat foods as varied as the beings themselves. Life on Stellar Haven was strange and wonderful and sometimes overwhelming. Rachel missed Earth's blue skies and green forests. David sometimes dreamed of quiet Sunday mornings in their old house. But neither of them regretted their choice. 1 year after leaving Earth, they stood together in the observation deck during what would have been Pip's birthday if they knew exactly when he hatched. Pip floated outside the viewport, his massive form silhouetted against the bright star. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if we'd driven past that alley?" Rachel asked softly. David put his arm around her. "Sometimes, but then I think about everything we would have missed. Not just the adventure, but Pip himself. We gave him life and he gave us purpose." "Mother, Father." Pip's voice entered their minds. "I have felt something. A signal very faint and very far away. It might be nothing, but it might be others of my kind." Rachel and David both straightened, suddenly alert. "Where?" David asked aloud. "Toward the galactic core," Pip replied. "Thousands of light years distant, in a region where space itself is strange and bent. The signal is old, perhaps ancient, but it calls to something deep within me." Through the viewport, they saw Pip spread his wings wide, catching the stellar radiation like solar wind. His scales pulsed with light in patterns that seemed to echo the rhythms of the universe itself. "I want to answer that call," Pip said simply. "I want to know if I am truly alone, or if somewhere in the vast darkness others of my kind still exist. Will you come with me?" Rachel looked at David. They had already given up one world for Pip. Now he was asking them to journey even farther, into unknown and possibly dangerous regions of space. But when Rachel searched her heart, she found the answer was easy. "Of course we'll come," she said. "We're family." Family stays together. Pip's joy flooded through their mental link, bright and warm as a star. Dr. Wong had already turned to her tablet, making notes and calculations. Captain Hayes, who had been listening from across the room, smiled and gave them a small nod of approval. Their journey was not over. In many ways, it was just beginning. From a rainy alley on Earth to the edge of known space, from a dying hatchling to a magnificent star dragon, Pip had transformed, and so had they. Whatever lay ahead, whatever mysteries waited in the galactic core, they would face it together. 18 months after arriving at Stellar Haven Station, Rachel stood in the massive assembly hall watching engineers put the final touches on the Deep Explorer. The ship was unlike anything she had seen before, even after living in space for so long. It stretched nearly 500 feet in length, with a hull made from materials that seemed to shift between solid and liquid states. Dozens of specialized pods extended from the main body, each designed to house different species with different environmental needs. This ship would carry them to the galactic core, a journey that would take years even with the fastest drives humanity and their alien allies could build. It was a journey into mystery, into danger, into the unknown parts of space where reality itself behaved strangely. Rachel should have been terrified. Part of her was, but a larger part felt nothing but excitement. Pip landed beside her, his approach silent despite his enormous size. He had grown again over the past months, now nearly the size of an elephant with a wingspan of almost 40 feet. His scales had developed complex patterns that shifted and changed with his moods and thoughts, creating displays of color that took Rachel's breath away. "The ship will be ready in 3 days," Pip's mental voice informed her. His telepathy had become so refined that he could communicate with everyone on the station simultaneously, when he chose to, though he usually kept his thoughts private to his family and close friends. "Are you nervous?" Rachel asked, reaching up to touch his neck. His scales were warm, always warm, as if he carried the heat of stars within his body. "Yes," Pip admitted, but also eager. "The signal grows stronger in my mind each day. I hear fragments of song, pieces of memory that are not my own. Others like me are out there, I am certain of it now. Whether they are alive or merely echoes of the past, I must know." David joined them, walking with Grix, who floated in his pressurized mobility sphere. The methane-breathing engineer had become one of their closest friends, and had volunteered immediately when the expedition was announced. "I still think you're all crazy." Grix's translated voice bubbled from his sphere's speakers, heading toward a region of space where black holes cluster like grapes and where dimensional barriers are thin. "But I suppose someone needs to keep the ship running when physics decides to take a vacation." David laughed. "We're lucky to have you, Grix. Your engineering skills saved the station's oxygen recyclers last month. I trust you with our lives." "Which is good because you're giving them to me," Grix replied, but his tone was warm with friendship. The crew for the Deep Explorer had been carefully selected, 15 individuals from 6 different species, each bringing unique skills and perspectives. Besides Grix handling engineering, there was Talara, the crystalline scientist, to study exotic physics, and Dr. Wong to continue researching Pip's development and any other life they might encounter. Captain Hayes had insisted on commanding the mission herself, with Lieutenant Okafor as her second. The others were specialists in navigation, communication, medical care, and planetary science. And then there were David and Rachel, listed officially as civilian specialists in Star Dragon care and development, but really they were simply Pip's parents, unwilling to let him journey into danger without them. The final 3 days passed in a blur of preparations and farewells. Rachel hugged friends she had made on the station, promising to send messages whenever they could, though everyone knew communication across such vast distances would be difficult and delayed. David transferred his work projects to other members of the computational team, making sure everything was documented and organized. On the last night before departure, they gathered in their quarters one final time. The room had been their home for 18 months, filled with small touches that made it theirs. Photos from Earth that they had brought on their original journey, gifts from friends representing a dozen different cultures and species, a shelf of data tablets filled with books and movies and music from their old life. They would leave most of it behind. The Deep Explorer had limited space, and everything had to serve a purpose. Rachel picked up a photo of herself and David from their wedding day, both of them so young and unaware of the journey that awaited them. She smiled at the memory, then carefully packed the photo in the small bag of personal items she was allowed. "Do you ever regret it?" David asked, watching her. "Leaving Earth, leaving everything." Rachel thought about it honestly. "I miss things," she said. "I miss my sister. I miss autumn leaves and the smell of rain on pavement. I miss knowing what everything was and how everything worked. But regret? No. This life, this adventure with you and Pip, it's more than I ever dreamed of having." David nodded, understanding completely because he felt the same way. Pip, who could now barely fit in their quarters, had his head resting near the doorway listening. "I am grateful." His mental voice was soft and filled with emotion. "I was alone and dying, and you gave me everything. I know this journey is dangerous. I know I am asking you to risk your lives for my questions. If you have changed your minds, I would understand." Rachel moved to Pip and hugged his massive head, running her hands over his familiar scales. "We haven't changed our minds. We're family, Pip. This is what families do." Launch day arrived with surprising calm. No grand ceremonies, no crowds. Space travel had become routine for Stellar Haven, and the Deep Explorer was just another ship leaving on just another mission. Only those who knew the crew personally came to see them off. The ship's interior was impressive. Large communal areas allowed the diverse crew to interact, while private quarters gave everyone space designed for their specific needs. Pip had an entire section that could be opened to vacuum, allowing him to exit and fly alongside the ship when needed. The bridge was circular, with stations positioned around a central holographic display that could show anything from star charts to sensor data. Captain Hayes took her position at the command station, looking completely at home despite this being her first time commanding a ship of this size. "All stations report ready," Lieutenant Okafor announced from the navigation console. "Stellar Haven Control, this is Deep Explorer requesting departure clearance." Hayes spoke clearly into the communication system. "Deep Explorer, you are cleared for departure. Safe journey to you all." The ship disengaged from the station with barely a vibration. Through the viewports, Rachel watched Stellar Haven begin to shrink. The massive ring that had been their home was becoming smaller, the bright star at its center dimming to just another point of light among millions. Pip flew outside the ship, circling it in sweeping arcs, his wings catching stellar radiation. His mental voice reached everyone aboard simultaneously. Thank you all for joining this journey. Whatever we find, whatever dangers we face them together, and that makes us strong. The ship accelerated smoothly faster and faster until Stellar Haven was lost among the stars. Hayes plotted their course toward the galactic core, toward the mysterious signals that called to Pip across thousands of light years. The journey would not be easy. They would pass through regions of space filled with deadly radiation, navigate around black holes whose gravity could tear apart planets, and eventually enter areas where the fabric of reality itself was unstable. But they had the best ship, the best crew, and the determination to find answers. Weeks turned into months as they traveled deeper into unknown territory. They discovered worlds unlike anything in the databases, saw phenomena that defied explanation. Pip grew stronger with each passing day, his abilities expanding as he was exposed to the intense stellar radiation near the galactic core. And the signal grew stronger too. What had been a faint whisper became a clear call, a song in a language that only Pip could fully understand. It spoke of history and memory, of knowledge preserved across eons, of others who waited in the strange spaces between stars. 6 months into their journey, David was working at his navigation console when Pip's voice filled his mind with sudden urgency. Father, I can see them now. Not with my eyes, but with my mind. Others of my kind, sleeping in a place where time moves differently. They are not many, perhaps only a dozen, but they have been waiting for someone to find them and remember what was lost. Rachel joined David at the viewport, both of them staring out at the swirling colors of the galactic core. Somewhere ahead, beyond the clouds of gas and the dangerous gravitational wells, lay the answer to the question that had driven them across the galaxy. Was Pip the last of his kind, or were there others? And if there were others, what would that mean for all of them? Captain Hayes turned from her command station. We've come this far together. Whatever's ahead, we'll face it the same way. As a crew, as a family. The Deep Explorer pushed forward, carrying its crew of dreamers and explorers toward mysteries that had waited thousands of years to be discovered. Rachel reached for David's hand and felt Pip's presence warm and strong in her mind. They had started this journey in a rainy alley on Earth, 2 ordinary people saving a dying creature because it was the right thing to do. Now they sailed between stars toward the unknown, no longer ordinary, no longer bound by the limits of one small world. Pip spread his wings wide outside the viewport, silhouetted against the brilliant chaos of the galactic core. His mental voice sang with joy and anticipation and love for those who had become his family. The universe was vast and strange and full of wonders, and together, they would discover as many of those wonders as their lives allowed. The journey continued, endless and magnificent, exactly as it should be.